This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the delayed start, or the slightly delayed start. I'm very pleased to welcome the Lost Visions project team from Cardiff University this afternoon to speak to us on their project Lost Visions, retrieving the visual element of printed books from the 19th century. We've got three speakers this afternoon. Professor Julia Thomas, Professor of English at the University of Cardiff, who is the principal investigator of this project. She's also the director of the database of mid-Victorian illustrations, and she's also published widely on Victorian material and visual culture. Alongside Julia, we've got Dr. Nicky Lloyd, who was one of the postdoc researchers on the project. She dealt with a range of things, including publicity and all kinds of other things, and her background, her PhD research was on the romantic period fiction. And Ian Harvey's also with us, software engineer, the man who made it all work, produced all the software, back end, front end, in all senses. Just a few bits of instruction before I pass over to our speakers this afternoon. Many of you will be following online. If you are following online, hashtag DHIST if you want to send in any questions for the discussion afterwards. We're going to have the speakers talk for a while, and then we will have questions and discussions afterwards. For those of you in the room, we are recording this live, but we won't be recording the questions afterwards, but just be aware of that when you are asking questions afterwards. And I suppose it's my great pleasure to pass over to Julie and her team.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting us. Illustration is a dark art. Despite the original meaning of the word illustrate, to light up, to make clear, to illuminate, and despite the startling visibility of illustration in the 18th and 19th centuries, these illustrations are today largely unseen. Publishers of Victorian novels rarely produce the books with the images with which they originally appeared. In the context of museums and galleries, illustration is low on the list of conservation and exhibition priorities. The digital environment, of course, has potentially made these illustrations accessible. But because they tend not to be marked up independently of the text, they are difficult to retrieve in terms of what they actually show. There's a very real danger of historic illustrations being lost. The Lost Visions project, which was funded by the AHRC, set out to remedy this. Our objective has been to create the largest online searchable archive dedicated to book illustration. We are working with a data set of books from the British Library that were digitised by Microsoft back in 2008. This includes over 65,000 volumes covering literature, philosophy, history and geography from a period roughly covering 1528 to 1946, although the majority of books tend to be 18th and 19th century. And what makes these books so interesting for us is that they include over 1 million illustrations. I thought I'd start just by giving you a snapshot of the sorts of illustrations that the archive contains. So we have thousands of advertisements, topographical illustrations. You can see here that our illustrations, some are colour, some are black and white. Literary illustration is very well represented. Decorations. We have around 300,000 decorations covering pictorial initials, motifs, headers, tailpieces. 65,000 title pages. Maps, tens of thousands of maps. Pictures of the natural world, sometimes beautifully represented and coloured. Scientific illustrations in the broader sense of the word. Illustrations accompanying travel books, travel writing, ethnographic works. Because the dataset covers such a wide period, we also have a range of reproductive techniques represented, including etchings, lithographs, wood engravings, and photographs, and aquatints. The sheer variety of illustrations with which we're dealing has presented its own challenges. With a project like this, it's not only the accessibility and searchability of the illustrations that's significant, but also the very processes of making them searchable. The methodologies themselves have implications for how these historic images are viewed. And this is what Ian Harvey is going to talk about now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for everybody for being here. My name is Ian Harvey. I was the guy tasked with making these million plus illustrations searchable in some way, which has been somewhat of a challenge, to be fair. We don't really know what's in there. I don't think anybody really knows what's in there. The British Library scanned these 65,000 volumes plus, and we were sent a million plus images. So I'm going to talk about the production of what we're calling the illustration archive, and this is both a website used for searching these illustrations, but also a collaborative sort of research tool that can be used to tell us what's in these illustrations as well, because there's no way that you can get really any size group of people within the scope of a research project to look and properly define the contents of a million plus images. So, what is it that we're trying to do? It's an attempt to create a research and discovery tool for anyone. Obviously we are within a Cardiff University, so it is a research tool for researchers, but is also out there to be used by members of the public as well. I, going into this, didn't really know what sort of researchers would be using it. I don't really know the expertise of different researchers that are going to be using this. I don't know what members of the general public are going to be trying to do with this, or what research or expertise backgrounds they've got. So the idea was to try and create this research tool, or this website, database really, in a way that as many features as possible could be added in as sort of sub-tools within the illustration archive, in a way to try and make it as accessible and usable by as many people as possible. And we've had, within the project, various workshops where we've shown it to a selection of school teachers, we've had historians, we've got another workshop coming up next week as well, where the aim is to get as much feedback as possible from as many different types of researchers, as many types of people, so that they can be using the illustration archive and telling me and telling us what they're getting out of it, what they're not getting out of it, and hopefully before the end of the project, of which we've got just a couple of weeks now, we can try and add as many features as possible to make this tool as useful as possible. So, it's a big data project. We're handed these million images. Obviously, we probably all know what big data is now. It's been a buzzword within multiple different arms of research for a couple of years. Basically, there's lots of it. A million images is kind of difficult to even get your head around, but basically it involved quite a large problem of even getting these million images from the British Library to Cardiff University so that we could even begin working with them. They involved sending a hard disk up the M4, then copying it onto these hard disks, and then sending those hard disks back down the M4 again, because that turned out to be the fastest way of moving data, which is sort of not what you would expect. Bearing in mind the sort of internet connectivity that we're attempting with all of this, the fact that we're sort of live streaming this now, and that there's a website up, for moving large amounts of data, and there's a quote at the bottom there, yeah, don't underestimate the bandwidth of, well, it probably wasn't a station wagon, but yes, yeah, so just full of hard disks. And then even once we've got the hard disks, copying them onto our system so that we can then start doing our work with it. Yeah, that was quite a big deal. So, and then that's before we even start doing anything with the data. As soon as you start analysing this in any way, you're basically going to double, probably maybe 10 times the amount of data that comes pouring out of the original data set that we've got. Storing it's expensive. We've got access to AHRC, which is the high-performance computing facility within Cardiff University that are storing and hosting our website. We've also got our machine vision, which I'll come on to later on, looking at these images to try and work out what's in there. So, as a starting point, done to death now, there's a lot of images. We've got some metadata about these images that was recorded by the British Library when they were doing their scanning. No illustration, no illustrators listed. In fact, basically no information about the illustrations themselves, other than the bibliographic metadata that came through the fact that they were taken from a book. So we've got things like the title of the book, we've got the author of the book, the year that that specific volume was published, but no real information about the images that we could work from. So, the British Library metadata, a decent starting point. That much we can actually create a fairly comprehensive search tool, because there is information within a book title about the images, maybe. So I don't know how clear that is up there, but this is the metadata which was produced by the British Library. They put it all up on GitHub in a nice machine-readable TSV format that I can put into my software and sort of do the number crunching there. And so we can see we've got an author, we've got a place of publishing, we've got a title, we've got the volume number, date of publishing. Sometimes there's an issuance, sometimes a shelf mark. The only real information that we've got about an image, or the illustration specifically, is a page number. The only thing we can know for absolute certainty is that that is wrong, because all of their scans start with the front cover of a book being page 0, which is that's not how you number books. But it's a start. At least then we can work from there, and it's consistent within the data set that that page number relates to those books, or that page within that book. So, with regards to the illustrations, we don't know what we've got. How do we try and find that out? Crowdsourcing. This is another thing that's been fairly common now for a number of years. The British Library also put all of these images up on Flickr, so there's people tagging on Flickr. The images are Creative Commons, which means that you can download, you can reuse. As far as my understanding of what they've been trying to do is they want the images out there. They want just people to use this data. We've had people, even when you say this is Creative Commons, it's tagged on Flickr with a certain usability license, which is essentially, please do whatever you want. We still get people asking us, what does that mean? Can I do this? Can I do that? It seems that with regard to the licensing of these images, even if we're very specific in terms of using the licensing, the average man on the street doesn't really know what that means anyway. So you can very carefully define the licensing, but people still want somebody to explain this to them in some sort of usable language. And that's an issue with all sorts of things, licensing online. But with these images, we're lucky, we can just say, do what you want, which means on the website, which I'll get to, we have a download button, because we can just say, if you like this picture, download it, do what you want, tag it, tweet it, write about it, whatever. So, we've got this tagging website. We will be, as I will demo in a minute, presenting this image to the user and just say, tell us about it. But as I said before, different people are going to have different expertise. They're going to have different opinions of what they see in an image. Some people will see it as being a cat. Some people will see it as being an etching. Some people will see it as being a very specific illustrator that produced this in a certain way and will know the life story behind this image. But most people are just going to see the cat. So how do we ask the user, what sort of questions are we going to ask them so that we can then record that knowledge and make that useful information for us so that we can then search that afterwards? So how do we structure these questions? How do we gain as much information as possible without guiding the user too much and too strictly, that if we have asked only very specific questions, they might have some information we haven't thought of, or a background expertise that we hadn't considered. We needed to make sure that we had a way for them to give us that information as well. And so we went round in circles, quite a sort of iterative process of development there, talking with people that came to our workshops, talking with our alpha and beta users, because they will come to us and say, well, how do I add this information? How do I tell you this that we hadn't even thought about? So this is the website as it currently stands. This is an example image as it would be shown to the user, asking them to tag that specific illustration. This is a a title page of a book, but there is, as Julia has shown, many different types of images, different sizes, different shapes, different colours, what have you. We're trying to present the metadata that we've got, and we're trying to ask people to both categorise and give us more detailed information about each illustration, which will then work its way into our search mechanisms. So here on the side we've got the idea to categorise types of image. This is terminology that we've also been working on. How do you even ask the user to categorise something? Because the chances are, for the vast majority of images, won't fall into the category that we've thought of, because there's a million of them, and so there's probably just as many categories as there are illustrations. But we've got some basic sort of fundamental ideas of what we think will be prominent illustration types. And these are just click buttons, and you can go through. I would do a live demo, but you never know how easy these things are going to be, so I'll just show it static there. And we're asking people to then type in into a free text box what other things that they see within the image, which then would be used by our machine learning afterwards. And we'll go back to this. When we're asking a user to add a tag into the system, we try and be a little bit smarter with it in the background, which, long and short of it, means for every tag that a user adds, we have up to 9 other tags that are added into the system alongside that. For example, if there's a church in the illustration, there's a number of them, just for example, it will also be tagged as a building and as a structure. Using WordNet, I'm going through and pulling out some hypernyms, and that goes up 3 levels of the hypernym structure until it gets too vague. As soon as it becomes something like object or thing, then I just drop it. But we also try to store some synonyms as well. So it would be both a church and a place of religious worship or a religious building. So, as I say, for every tag that's added, there is up to 9 tags that go in. We're also storing the order in which the user adds these tags. The idea behind that being that when you first look at the image, the first thing you type into this WordNet-based system, hopefully the first thing that you tag would be the most prominent thing in that image. And then afterwards you'll start tagging things that would be, oh, there's something there as well, oh, and there's something over there in the corner. And so if we record the order in which these things are tagged, maybe we've got an order of precedence when it comes to searching these things. When somebody then searches for a similar word later, we'll be able to say, well, actually, this image is not only tagged as having that, it was the first thing that other users saw within this image. So that raises it up the priority list in this sort of search function. It seems to work quite well so far. So I'll go on to the machine learning, because that's the other branch of what we're trying to do here. And the idea is that this will run alongside the crowdsourcing and the tagging element that we've got within the system. With my computer science hat on, the obvious thing to me when you've handed a million pieces of data is to try and create a system that can do all that number crunching as quickly as possible. And if not, find out what's in the image, because most machine vision things at the moment, from what I've seen, and I know Google's recently released a number of different things that are doing machine vision in very, very smart and intelligent ways. It's normally trained on photos, and we don't have too many of these. These are line drawings or sketches, or the sort of things that wouldn't lend itself directly to photographic machine vision tools. It can be done, and there are other universities that I know have tried this. But the way I approach this is to just look for similarities between images, so that if the machine can detect this image is a little bit like this image, which is a little bit like this image, the idea from there being that once one of those is tagged, maybe that tag applies to the other images. And this requires a massive amount of compute resources to do that for a million images. But alongside the crowdsourced system, there's this idea of this positive feedback loop between the two. The machine vision will make predictions, which the users can then validate. the users will tag things which can be used as the training set for the machine vision to learn on and then make its predictions from. That's an overly technical diagram there. I won't dwell on it, but essentially it's the idea of just a database in the middle. There's the crowdsourcing workflow along the top and the different sort of questions that we're asking them. The machine learning stuff at the bottom, producing various categorizations, and this feedback system within the two to try and, with each iteration, gain a little bit more knowledge out of the system. So, assuming all that works, which would be nice, and I like to think it's doing fairly well so far, the researchers then want to search these things. That's the main goal. So we've got the metadata search. We can search within the author fields, the title fields, the publishers. We can search by decade for people that want maybe a slightly more vague thing. I don't want a specific year, I want this sort of era. So that's in there. There was an attempt throughout the project. I was trying to extract illustrators from book titles based on the idea that within a title it will say illustrated by such and such. So if I can pull that phrase out of the title, strip off the illustrated by, hopefully that's the illustrator. That worked with varying degrees of success. There's many phrases such as illustrated by blah, 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 and a map. And so my illustrator came up being Joe's blogs and a map, or illustrated by pen and paper, which is not particularly helpful. Illustrated by the editor. I don't know who the editor is. There's lots of that. So it's derived information. I could never really validate that, but there's an attempt in there to try and do these things. Search keywords. Just as it sounds, you type in keywords for the things you're looking for. It searches in all of the above fields, as well as the tags that people are adding in, and the derived tags. And these are sort of becoming more and more vague as we go down the list. This idea of sort of searching visually. Just show me a bunch of images and I'll decide what I like the look of. Because you just want, perhaps, this sort of serendipity approach. Just show me everything and I'll figure out if I like it or not. And then at the bottom here, it's providing prompts from the system to consider other images. So once the user's seen an image they like the look of, maybe we can suggest some others. So similar to when you go on Amazon and you're looking at something, it pops up and says, maybe you consider buying all of these things as well. And there's an intelligent sort of thought process that goes into that to try and connect the suggestions with the image that you're looking at. So, the types of searching, assuming that the previous things are fully grasping all of the different things that people will attempt to do. We want to know the history of the image, these illustrations. We want to know the stories that may be connected to it. We want to know where it was placed, why it was drawn. These things that are not necessarily able to be captured in a single tag or could not be extracted from a book title. And so we're allowing the user or the tagger to add not only individual 1 or 2 word tags, but also longer descriptions, which also become searchable. And yeah, as I've said before, this idea of sometimes a user would want to be very specific in their searches, and sometimes they want to discover in a more vague and serendipitous way. So I'll go through now the different features that are in there regarding the different types of search. So we've got the keyword search, the advanced search, different views on the search results. As we developed the illustration archive, it came out that you can present the results in different ways that work better with different researchers, and then help the researcher, based on the way that you present that data to them, help them move forward to redefine their search or be more exact with what they're trying to do, or look around that subject more widely. So we've got this concept of similar images within the entire image set, images within the book, and this idea of the machine vision work also offering suggestions. So this is the output from the similar images element at the front end. I've had to chop up the website to make it fit on the slide here, but this is the image. Originally, this is the metadata that we have within the British Library metadata that was handed to us. This is the cloud of tags underneath. So this is probably just one user that's tagged it, and this is obvious the things that the user will have typed, such as we've got farmhouse and horse. What they probably didn't type was hoofed animal, or equid, because it's the Latinate in terms. But when the user then searches later on, these more vague terms, these more scientific terms, will also be part of the search when the results are produced to them. We've got here all the illustrations from the book in a thumbnail view, so you can scroll straight through the book and see what else is in there. And these similar images up here are using these tags to find within the system things that have been tagged with things similar to the tags for that image. I'm not sure how clear I'm getting that. There's some maths underneath it. I've already mentioned the order in which the tags are put into the system for the original image. This search is also considering the order in which the tags were added to these results. So if there was a farmhouse in the first image and that was tagged the first time, and in the second image there was also a farmhouse tagged the first tag that went in, that's considered to be a stronger match than, yes, there is a horse in this image, but it was the fifth or sixth thing that was tagged, and this image had horse as number one. That's a weaker link because it's not as prominent within the system. And that goes right down through all of the tags that have been added. And that happens, I'm showing the top 30 images that come back. There's a weighted score, there's a mathematical algorithm that works underneath to work out within some degree of accuracy. It doesn't really matter what the number is that is spat out, but at least it gives us a nice ordered list of which illustrations the system considers to be similar to the illustration that you're currently looking at. So this is a screenshot, cut out screenshot of the advanced search. This is everything that I've explained previously, so the metadata which is being searched there, there's drop-down systems, there's different ways of searching things. The keyword search searches everything, but I've also got the option in there to only search tags, because sometimes you get all sorts of things that within a book title, it will say something like, and a map at the end of the book title. Not every image within that book is going to be a map, it's a map, and so you want to find the one that's been specifically tagged as being a map. But, as I said previously, different people are going to be searching in different ways. The idea is to try and present as many different options there as possible. I mentioned the way that these results are presented to the user. There's this gallery view, which is quite pretty. The metadata there, any information really about the image is hidden. You're purely just looking at the images, and from there you can navigate further through. Clicking on any one of these images will take you through to that tagging page, so you can see what other people have tagged, you can see the metadata that we've got already. We're trying to promote that the user would then add a few tags of their own. After finding something, they will be not only searching using the system, but also improving the system as they continue to search. There's also the option within this view to remove different images from this gallery view, so that these images rearrange in kind of a visually pleasant way to hide images that you're uninterested in, and you can then have a full selection of images in front of you that are what you were looking for. This here is another search that's more specific. You can't see what it is I've searched there, but obviously that is I must have searched for colour within the keyword search, and this is a search for Cardiff specifically, I think. And here's a similar search, but using the other view, it's this list view that does provide you the metadata, so you can see where the book came from, you can see when it was published, the authors, etc. I mentioned previously the users wanted to not even search, just see what's in there. There was no real input required, just show me some pictures and then just move through the images in a more unstructured way. So there's an option within the illustration archive, to just hit random, and it shows you 50 entirely random images from the image set. And that there gives you a good example of all the sorts of things that are in there. There's decorative things, there's these stamps, quite a lot of portraits, but basically the idea is to just show people stuff. There's a million things. I can't necessarily always produce. The search is going to offer you the thing that you want to find. Or maybe you don't know what you want to find, you just want to see stuff. So that option's in there as well. So, collaborative tools. Once you've found these images, you're going to want to do something with them. You're going to want to share the illustrations. You're going to want to collect them together. Maybe download them, add them to your own research, add them as pictures for your own personal blog or sales website. Who knows? So there's tools within the website to help you to do these things. There's the idea of these custom collections where you can add captions to these collections that you're putting together. You can then present them as exhibitions, so it's a full screen view of a scrolling collections which are public. They can be tweeted. There's a link that you can just say, well, I quite like this collection that I put together myself. I want to show all my friends. There's also the option within that to tell us that you've created a collection and you're kind of proud of it and you think other people might want to see it. So there's a button there, we get an email and it says, hi, I've created an exhibition. Do you want to put it on your site? We hit a button and it appears on our site. So it's this community feedback to say, to get us more in contact with our users and shows us what other people are interested in and allows us to show other people what our user base is trying to do with what we've got here. And there's the option to download and share and tweet and use other social media type things. A screenshot of some user-created collections. It's just whilst I was doing my basic dev work, so I've got a random selection of trains and things in there, just to, why not? And it's too small here. You can see that there's a tweet button and a share button and a button to tell us about the exhibition and that have been put together. And underneath here, there's the individual captions that the user has added to their collection. So, and we can then, before we put that onto our front page of the website, we can sort of moderate and edit that. And this is the exhibition page as it currently stands. I'm still working on that, but essentially it's a long list of things that it can scroll through. A bit of information at the bottom about the image and the person that created the collection, because this was another issue as we went through. The images themselves are Creative Commons. You can do what you like, share and share about and all that. But maybe the person that put the collection together would like to be attributed. It's their effort that they put into telling us what's in their collection. So, yeah, it's mentioned by name down the bottom. And yeah, this is a scrolling exhibition. So, that's what we've built. And I'm going to hand over to Nicky now to tell you how other people have been using it.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, as Ian says, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the current research applications of the material in the collection and the way in which we anticipate that it might be used in future. So quite a few of our colleagues in Cardiff University are working on projects creating visual archives or visual collections of images from various periods. So we'll start by talking a little bit about the Women in Trousers visual archive, as you can see. Fantastic photograph there on the front page. This has been created by one of our colleagues in Cardiff University, Dr. Becky Mumford, and the premise behind it really is that it's a kind of visual journey through the history of women's costume and women wearing trousers, and the ways in which this as a cultural phenomenon is linked to periods of social and political upheaval, women's liberation, radical thought, aesthetic innovation, and erotic freedom. So the archive sort of charts various ways in which women wearing trousers has kind of represented an illegitimate assumption of male authority and power. So I've spent quite a lot of the last year trawling through the collection for pictures of women wearing trousers in various forms, which isn't as easy as it might seem, believe me. The archive as it stands, Becky's used quite a lot of material from contemporary periodicals, there are a number of caricatures and cartoons and so on. You can see a series of images here on dress reform and yeah, an image of the horror of a servant coming in with these pair of bloomers, yes, and presenting them to some outraged women. So yeah, part of the collection is based on caricature and this kind of image, but we've been able to use the collection to supply a series of images from literature. So, and we've managed to find some text that Becky had never come across before, which I think really adds something to the collection. This image here on the right, the Wheels of Chance, kind of taps into the reappearance of bloomer costume in the 1890s with the craze for cycling. So we found a number of images that kind of depict these women in cycling costumes and so on, and various literary illustrations. And this text on the left, I think, comes back to that idea about women's costume representing a kind of illegitimate assumption of male authority and power. This is the tale of a girl called Stevie who kind of infiltrates the patriarchal world of Oxford and Cambridge by dressing as a man, and she's involved in a series of escapades like this one here where she's found in a boy's costume sitting on the knee of another man. Yeah, so we've managed to, and I think the title here itself sort of represents the way in which female costume is linked to the kind of political movement of the New Woman. So the images from the collection have kind of contributed to Becky's kind of broad cultural overview of women's costume. Another one of our colleagues is working on the Robin Hood tradition and the way that kind of functions as a cultural narrative. And we've been able to provide him with a series of images from, I think he's looking at how the different editions of Joseph Ritson's Robin Hood ballads. So I think he was familiar with the illustrations that we have here in the 1884 edition, but we were able to provide him with some images from a different edition that he'd never come across. And I think in his teaching, he's been able to kind of create this multiple narratives of the way the same text is illustrated in different ways in different periods. And I've just done a sort of screen grab of a basic keyword search for Robin Hood here, just to sort of highlight the way in which searching the archive brings different strands of kind of cultural interest together. So you can see here, I think there are a couple of examples from the Ritson collection of poems, songs and ballads that I've just referred to. But there are also a huge amount of kind of fictionalised versions of the Robin Hood story, and I think it's something that Rob hadn't, a lot of them were things that Rob hadn't really come across before. So it's a way of kind of reviving, I think, some of these lost texts. Also, you can see in the top there, I think the thing that struck us when we were looking for it is the way in which the kind of fictional narratives merge with narratives of travel writing and literary tourism. So Robin Hood is kind of, as you'd expect, brought into a lot of kind of local history texts, and you can see that one at the top, the very long title, but kind of playing on the sort of glamour, I suppose, of the Robin Hood tradition. Another project that's currently ongoing in the department is the Victorian Illustrated Shakespeare Archive, which is being developed by one of our PhD students, Nicky Goodman. And he's used the collection as part of his PhD research and part of his development of this archive, which I believe launches at the 23rd of April. Give him a plug there. Keep your eye on Twitter for that. Yeah, so. And another one of our colleagues has been working on the Indian Mutiny. Again, we don't know exactly what the outcome has been yet, but she's used a number of images, I think, in her own teaching and her research. So we'll wait for that. Moving away from kind of literature here, we've had some conversations with the developers of the Ethno-Ornithology World Archive at Oxford. We're not really collaborating directly with them yet. But I think it got us thinking about how we might sort of use the archive in a broader sense. So we, again, I've spent a lot of time searching for pictures of birds alongside women in trousers. So just to give a broad example really, it's fascinating how wide the range of material is. As you can see here, first image there, we have kind of a lot of kind of ornithological and scientific texts, but obviously we have literary illustrations, and the way in which birds feature in decorations and kind of on the periphery of text, I think is something that's fascinating in thinking about the broad cultural fabric of ethno-ornithology in the 19th century. And one of my favourites here, which I think shows a really interesting kind of hybrid of disciplines, is this text called The Poetry of Birds, which is a really interesting kind of fusion, I think, of Victorian science and romantic poetry. So you have these kind of quite scientific and ornithological images of birds alongside quite kind of Keatsian romantic descriptions of how the bird relates to the human self and so on.
Can I jump in there?
Yes.
Yeah, this is a slide which I didn't put within my part of the demonstration, but within the tagging page of each of the illustrations, we've got the ability to go from that illustration to the full page of the book that these illustrations came from. So there would have been a button that would have been a square as a chopped out image from the image set that we were given. And so we can move from that to the full page view, and we've got a side-by-side view to see maybe the context of the image which is going on there. And it's also, we've got the next page and previous page buttons, and there's nothing stopping you from reading the entire book like that, should you wish. It actually renders quite nicely on the screen. The text is perfectly readable. We're not yet offering the ability to download the entire book, but it's actually quite a large download, but it renders on the screen fine there. Maybe this is a good time for me to mention exactly how the images came about even being produced in the first place. We've got them on the page, we've got the pages, and we've got the images cut separately. Basically, the British Library, possibly Microsoft on their behalf, ran OCR on all of these pages because, as I say, we've got the entire scanned book, not just these illustrations. They ran the OCR on every single page. Anything that didn't show up as being text was considered to be an image. So a square was chopped around that image, and that was declared to be an illustration within a book. It doesn't take too much to jump and think, well, hang on, there's going to be plenty of things in a book that is not text, that's not an illustration either, and that's very true. When you're searching through entirely randomly within our system, you will see a lot of British Library stamps, British Museum stamps, dead flies, thumbprints, all sorts of things that the OCR has said, that's not text, that must be an image, and that's made it into our own set. So that's just an interesting thing about this whole big data thing, is that there's this concept of sort of not necessarily junk data, but at least data that you weren't really looking for, that needs to be filtered out along the way. There was another book, as I was going through, that it said that there was an illustration on every single page within the book, within the database, which seemed a little bit unlikely. So I went into it, and it turned out every single page was actually in Cyrillic. And it was the OCR that said, this doesn't look like text. What it actually meant was that doesn't look like a Latin language text. And so within our data set, we've got every single page of the book considered to be an illustration. So yes, I just thought I'd jump in there and explain just some of the trials and tribulations that we've had to go through while producing this, but also to plug the extra feature of being able to read the book, which is quite nice, I think.
Yeah, I think in this sense, it enables you to read the illustration in a completely different context, because I was kind of thinking of this as an ornithological text, or and then suddenly you're able to see it in a completely different way. So just to finish talking about research applications and potential research applications, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my own research and how the illustration archive has allowed me to develop some of the things that I've been working on in the past. And I just wanted to do that in reference to Walter Scott and depictions of Scotland. My PhD thesis was in Romantic period fiction and Enlightenment philosophy, and I looked at the way in which Scott engaged with visual culture to kind of create a sense of sociability and sympathy in the reader or the viewer, kind of using visual techniques in his prose fiction in a sense. And in doing that, I used the Walter Scott Digital Archive produced by the University of Edinburgh, which has sort of image archive section, and also their Illustrating Scott database, which has printed illustrations of the Waverley novels, both obviously fantastic resources that really kind of contributed a lot to my own research. But I think in terms of the potential for exposing kind of interdisciplinary links, and that's the kind of work that I was doing in my own research, I found that the illustration archive and the breadth of material that it has been hugely valuable to me. So I've just kind of, to illustrate that, I've come up with just 4 slides here from various texts, which I think you can see participate in a shared visual aesthetic. So on the top left, there's an illustration from Scott's Lay of the Last Minstrel. And I think, having only used archives that deal with illustrations of Scott's text directly, what's been fascinating for me is to kind of see this shared aesthetic discourse in different kinds of texts. So I've come across in the archive a number of these sort of hybrid texts, really. So the one at the top, Scott and Scotland, and then the one on the bottom left, a series of sketches of the existing localities alluded to in the Waverley novels. Rather than just focusing on fiction, I found this whole kind of genre of hybrid texts which sort of work in an area between literary fiction and travel writing. So they're kind of illustrations of fictional narratives, but also participate in literary tourism and the way in which Scotland was being represented more broadly at the time. And also on the bottom right there, this is just a kind of a more conventional text of travel writing. But again, I think it's fascinating to see how this kind of shared, how the images are so similar in text from completely different genres. So I think, yeah, I just wanted to sort of emphasise the way in which, for me, using this has helped kind of break down generic boundaries and to see a sense of sort of a multi-layered fabric of a shared visual and aesthetic imagery, which exists beyond the field of straight book illustration, if you like, and sort of works in a number of different genres simultaneously. So to finish off, I think just to come back to some of Julia's points about illustration studies and how the archive has shaped that field. As Julia said, illustration has remained invisible as an aesthetic form, in a sense, at the bottom of a hierarchy that places painting and sculpture at the top. And in a digital context, it's fared no better. New technologies have aided the editing of the literary text far better than the images that accompany it, until now, that is. So hopefully some of the things that we've talked about today have helped to explain the way in which the project has shaped illustration studies in a variety of ways. It's drawn attention to the lack of established linguistic hierarchies for illustration, and I think that's something that we all found incredibly challenging when we were coming up with the tagging or the crowdsourcing process that Ian talked about. And again, I think it draws attention to the hierarchy of textual production, the way in which the illustrator has tended to be obscured in favour of the privileging of the author. So we're hoping that this archive is sort of presenting these texts in terms of a series of co-creators rather than in this conventional hierarchy of author and then illustrator at the bottom of the hierarchy. And I think we've tried, in a sense, the title of the project that we're working on is Lost Visions, this idea of reclaiming the visual element of the text. And Ian's talked a bit about how, obviously, the search mechanisms that we have work in terms of textual keywords and so on, but we've tried to kind of emphasise that element of, as you said, having the grid view, the gallery view, and the sort of idea of serendipitous random searching. So in both a theoretical and a practical sense, I think the illustration archive has served to expose and to re-establish the visual element of books.
Thank you very much.